Thank you for joining us this morning on our webinar on removable media functions in Cscape. So this is part one. We do have part two coming up next week. And as usual, if you have any questions at any point throughout the webinar, feel free to put them into your questions panel and we'll get them at the end. So this is roughly 18 minutes or so, and we'll get going there now. So,
welcome to today's tutorial. Let's get started. Let's take a look at our agenda. We will discuss the removable media functionality in the Horner OCS and the removable media graphics object. We'll talk about the removable media logic functions, the rename function block, the delete function block, and the copy function block. We will have live demonstrations throughout, and as always, we'll finish with a live Q&A session. Let's start with the OCS removable media functionality. All modern OCS models support at least one type of removable media, whether that's microSD or USB flash drives. The OCS uses a FAT32 file system, which has a 2 TB maximum volume size. Long file names can be used without problem in the logic, but will be displayed in shortened 8.3 format in the removable media graphics object and the system menu. If you prefer to avoid this shortening, then limit the files you use to 8.3 format. Media functions can be useful for maintenance. You can save or load a program, you can clone your unit without losing any password or intellectual property protection, and you can view the directory on the memory card. At runtime, you can log data, write reports, and get screen captures. There are a series of system registers that can provide status of the primary drive, which is usually the microSD drive. There are 7 different status codes for the drive, which are currently on screen. There's a system register which gives you the free space available in the drive. There's another system register for the total capacity of the drive. Let's discuss the removable media graphics object. You can place this on the screen to allow the system designer to provide the user with controlled access to the primary memory card. You can also decide what maintenance type functions you want the user to have access to, which are showcased on screen. It also provides a drive status at a glance, by being color-coded. You can change the colors for each status in the settings. If the operator presses the removable media object, a screen will pop up, which displays the current file listing. This gives them all the functionality that was enabled by the system designer. You can also grab a screen capture using either a bitmap or a JPEG of the current screen. This is done by assigning a trigger bit to capture the current screen. If you get repeated screen captures, you could be overwriting information with the same file name. You can utilize a file counter to allow you to repeatedly screen capture without overwriting any files. Now we'll demonstrate the removable media object in Cscape. Please note that the dates in these videos are in American format. These can easily be changed in the system menu to suit your desired format. You can find more info on the handling of the clock and dates in one of our past webinars, OCS Real-Time Clock, which can be watched back on our website at any time, along with all previous webinars. I'm in Cscape now. We're going to go to the View and Edit Screens area here. In the menu at the top, there is a Configure option. We're going to configure screen captures. That's accessed from the Config menu. Here you configure a single bit variable for triggering a screen capture. You select your file format, and then you give your file a name. Now if you want to have repeated screen captures with different names, then you can use our file counter capability. Let's pull up the file name counters. There are up to 4 file name counters that can be utilized. If you want to use one of these, you can add some syntax into your file names. It will append however many digits you specify to the end of your file name so that your file names are unique. And then you can configure an auto increment feature. When it gets to its maximum, you can configure it to restart again at the minimum. Now let's look at the removable media object here. I've already got one on my screen. You can select it here under Removable Media Manager. You would normally click to select it, then click and drag to size it. I'll delete this one and show you the one I've already configured. We'll double click here, Starting at the top, these are all the operations that you're going to allow your operator to execute at runtime when he presses this removable media object. I only allowed delete file, change directory, and view file. Down here are the color codes, which you can customize for different statuses. Okay, so that was the removable media object. Let's look at what that looks like at runtime. Here is my XL7. I'm going to press the removable media button. And as you can see, you get a pop-up of the directory that's been specified in the object itself. You can select the starting directory where you want this object to display. I have the ability to navigate now. If I want to perform a delete function, I can do that because I've been allowed by the system designer. That was the removable media object at runtime. Now we're going to be looking at removable media logic functions for manipulating files. And those are the rename files function, the delete files function, and the copy files function. Let's start with the rename function block, which is used to perform a file rename. You need to specify what the old file name is and what the new file name is going to be. You can either hard code these file names, or you can assign variables to these fields for the function block. There's also a status available, so you'll need to assign a status variable. You'll get a -4 for status if the function block is not being executed. You'll get a 0 if it is executing and successful, and you'll get an error code if it has failed. The function only passes power if it's successful, so you can assign a coil to the output of that rename function block, and you'll know that it's successfully executed. Here's a list of all the status codes. There's a couple of them that are useful. For example, -2 tells you that the function is still active, but has not been completed yet. Function blocks also let you use wildcards, which allow a variable file name to be specified. You can use up to 4 different file name counters, which require a double integer variable. They are mostly useful for the file capture function. To use them, when you specify your file name, you will append a $sign followed by the file name counter, then a lowercase u, and then the number of digits you want to append to your file name. For example, $1 u2 is specifying the file name counter number 1 with 2 digits appended to the end. The time and date and screen number wildcards are also very useful. These are additional codes that you can embed in your file names and are all on screen now. For example, $y specifies that you're going to put 2 digits of the current year into your file name. Now we'll demonstrate the rename function block in Cscape. So I've dropped a rename function block here in this simple piece of logic. The rename is being triggered by a push button on the screen. I'll show you what the screen looks like soon. In this example, I did not use wildcards, so its name is quite long. I'll start with capture.bmp, and I'm going to rename that to archive.bmp. When you enter these file names, you need to put single quotes around the actual file names. If you want to assign a variable instead, you would not use the single quotes. I've assigned a status register, so I can monitor the status of this function block. If this function block executes successfully, this bit will turn on. That can be used for other logic, or just as an indication that the rename worked properly. I've also got a coil named rename fail. So how did I create that? Well, I monitored the status, and I stated that if the status is ever a value other than 0, -2, or -4, then I've got a failure. 0 means success. -4 means I'm not executing right now. -2 means I'm currently executing, but I've not finished yet. So if none of these are happening, then I have a failure in the status register. Now we'll look at how I would do a rename at runtime. So I'm going to do a screen capture, and then I'm going to rename that particular file. Let's look at our removable media listing here. Here's our file list, and here are the files on there. Next, I'm going to go to my trend screen. Then I'm going to hit this capture button. This button is tied to the trigger bit that I've assigned to the screen capture functionality. So when I press this bit, it executes a screen capture function, which would put a new file on removable media. That's called capture.bmp. Now I'll go to a different screen that I've created. And here I've created the simple controls to execute the rename in that grey box. So we'll take the capture.bmp file and we're going to rename it as archive.bmp. I'll execute a rename by pressing this button here, and you can see that my rename went well. If we look at the media file, you can see that I no longer have capture.bmp, but I do have archive.bmp. Now I'm going to try and execute this function again, but this time it's failed because of code 66. From our status register cheat sheet, code 66 means that the file name or path name cannot be found. So we couldn't execute the rename because capture.bmp does not exist. Okay, so that was the rename function. Now we'll discuss the copy function block. This can be used to move a file or a series of files from one directory to another or from one drive to another. There are some wildcards that can be used. If you know most of the characters in a file name, but you don't know all of them, you can use the question mark wildcard for that. You can use multiple question marks too, where each question mark represents any character that's part of the file name. There's also the asterisk wildcard that can be used for a copy star dot star or a copy star dot bmp, etc. We'll show an example of a copy function here. Our source file is archive.bmp. Our destination includes several wildcards. We take our archive.bmp file, and then that file is renamed and placed in a new location with a new file name. Archive.bmp is copied over to a subdirectory called captures. There's another subdirectory under that which is built on the month, day, and year. The actual file name that's given to this copied file at the destination is built around the hour, minute, and second. Here's another example of the copy function block. Let's say we want to take all of the CSV files in our data logs directory and copy those to a destination of archive, and then into another subdirectory that's built on month, day, and year. So all of the files that are residing in the datalog folder that end in CSV are copied to that folder. The file name is the date at which the copy was executed. Now we'll demonstrate this function block in Cscape. I'm back in Cscape, and I'm going to move to another section of my program. Here's the copy block. This is that first example I showed you. Between quotes, we have archive.bmp because that's the specific file name I'm looking for. And then here is the destination, where I'm going to be placing this file on the microSD under a captures directory and then another directory based on date. And then we assign a file name based on time. If I wanted this to be copied to the USB A drive, I would just add a B colon to the beginning of the file name. That would specify the other drive instead of the built-in microSD. Let's take a look at another copy function. Here is the copy function where we're using the wildcard so that all of the files in this subdirectory that are of type CSV get copied over into this directory. We're specifying star.csv so we could be operating on multiple files. Anytime you're using a copy function on multiple files, then your destination needs to be a folder, not a file name. If it's a single file that you're copying, then you would have a file name as your destination. Let's take a look at our OCS here. We'll take a look at a copy function. This is effectively going to copy archive.bmp to this directory. My current status is -4. That's because the function is not yet executing. When I press this copy button, it's changed to -2 and then to 0. -2 means I'm working on it, but I'm not done yet. 0 means I'm complete and everything is worked. So I was able to copy from archive.bmp to that new subdirectory. Now let's look at removable media. There's a captures subdirectory there now, which wasn't there before. When you do a copy function, if your destination includes a folder or a directory that doesn't exist yet, the OCS will create it. I can navigate down here. Here's the new directory that's based on the date. If I navigate down even further, There's the file name that I copied. It's been given a new name based on today's time, and if I hit enter again, because it's a bitmap file, the OCS can view the bitmap. So here's what my screenshot looks like. It has dotted lines around the outside to show that it's a screenshot and not the actual screen. If I press it again, it goes back to the removable media object and I can escape. Now we'll show you a copy where we're going to copy a whole series of CSV files to another location on the same drive. Let's first make sure those files exist. I'll go to removable media, I'll go to the data logs directory, and as you can see, I have 5 different files that have been created. And you can see the one at the bottom is still updating. Alright, so I'll copy those. I got the -2 saying it was busy, and 0 saying it was done. Let's look at our archives directory. Alright, there's our subdirectory, and here are the CSV files all copied over there where we wanted them to go. So that was the copy function block. Now we'll take a look at the delete function block, which can be useful for file maintenance. You can use the delete function to delete one or more files using the same wildcard functions mentioned earlier. For this first example, we're using a delete function and we're deleting archive.bmp. This result is straightforward. The file is located and then deleted. Whereas if we specify wildcards, then we could delete a whole series of files. So if I did a delete with star.bmp, then it will delete all of the files in the directory which ends in bmp. Now we'll demonstrate this function block in Cscape. The delete function couldn't be simpler. This can be a variable, but I've made it a file name by putting it in between single quotes. I built my status exactly the same way for delete and copy as I did for the initial rename. As long as my status remains at 0, -4, or -2, then I'm not in an error condition. I've created a failed bit there. Now let's look at the delete function in the OCS. Our delete function is set up to delete archive.bmp. Let's first make sure it's actually there. There it is. If I execute this, we should end up at 0 for our status. Well, that worked perfectly. If we try and do it again, it will fail because it cannot find the file as it has already been deleted. So that wraps up the delete function block and today's demonstration. Thank you for attending today's tutorial. The Q&A session will begin shortly.
Okay, let's see what we've got in. Just the one question so far. Why did we have nothing on read removable media or write removable media? So this is a part 1 of 2. So we will be going through everything read and write in next week's webinar in part 2. Not seeing anything else in at the moment. Okay. So I shall bring you across my screen as always. Okay, you should all hopefully be seeing my screen right now. So as I mentioned, this is a 2-parter. So we do have part 2 next week, and following into graphics and animation, audio, J1939. That's taking us all the way up to the end of November. So all registration links are live. So if you want to register for any of these now, you can. And I don't see any more questions. I think that's it. Nice and straightforward this morning. Thank you all for joining us again, and we hope to see you again next week. Have a nice day.